visions to inspire people by what they hear, see and feel. Everything we do is trying to live up to that. The players have got an awesome commitment statement that they developed. That is, we will work beneath the black so we can stand amongst the black, that one day live and breathe all black. I'm Clark Laidlaw, and this is the Rugby Hive.
Today's guest is Clark Laidlaw, current New Zealand Sevens coach and former Scotland international on the HSBC World Rugby Sevens Series from 2001 to 2007. Laidlaw took over the All Black Sevens role in 2017 and lifted 2 titles the following season: the Rugby World Cup Sevens at AT&T Park in San Francisco and Commonwealth Games Gold on the Gold Coast. In 2020, his Kiwi side won the HSBC World Rugby Sevens Series, bringing back the prestigious title to the people of New Zealand, the first time in 6 years, and ending the longest drought for the #1 rugby nation in the world. In this mammoth episode, we talk about Laidlaw's Scottish roots, how he became a New Zealander, taking over from the legend that is Sir Gordon Tietjens, what is the All Black way, and switching between coaching 15s and 7s. We delve into Olympic Games prep, bringing in 15s All Blacks ahead of that iconic event, managing players at multi-sports events, plus Laidlaw's coaching philosophies, favourite New Zealand moment, influence of Tamasi Thama, and much more.
He's so dangerous! Freddy Krueger has nightmares about him!
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Hive. I'm Dallen, Stanford, and despite my South African accent, I was fortunate enough to play rugby for the United States on the Sevens World Series.
And I'm MacDowell, a former Canadian Sevens international. Back in my playing days, I went head-to-head against Dallen in the USA.
For several years, Robin has coached international sevens for various countries, including Canada and Mexico. He's massively passionate about growing the game across the Americas through his MacDowell rugby programs at all levels. I'm currently a commentator for World Rugby, most recently broadcasting the Rugby World Cup in Japan, as well as the amazing Sevens World Series.
More than a decade later, we are teaming up to bring you insights from legendary players and coaches from around the world.
All legends have a story. The Rugby Hive podcast is here to share it.
Welcome to the Hive.
Oh, he's more dangerous than climate change!
Hello and welcome to episode 17. We continue the quest down the greatest minds involved in the coaching game. Last week we had the exceptional Australian Andy Friend, and for a while in the HSBC World Rugby Sevens Series, he went head-to-head with today's guest, All Black Sevens coach Clark Laidlaw. Also, he's a former player on the Sevens World Series, representing Scotland from 2001 to 2007. Clark was so generous with his time and insight. And Robin, I think we have enough content to fill a few episodes.
Yeah, we just kind of let him keep going. I could listen to Clarky all day. He's a wealth of knowledge. And again, it's, for me, so fascinating to have a Scotsman that we both played against back in the day. Now move on to coach the All Black. And again, it's a common theme with these successful coaches, just very humble, caring, family orientated. I've learned a great deal from him over the last few years myself. So I know the audience out there will be sinking their teeth into it.
And then anything to report from your side?
No, just hard at it. Temperatures are dropping down here on the west coast of Canada. So just a few layers because I'm pretty soft.
Things are definitely cooling down a bit. Excited for some news out of the New England Free Jacks, which is coming out later this week. And then some Verity Explains commentary. I know it's one of your highlights. So I think next week we'll start releasing some of that content. So look out for that. Shut all the gates, my friend.
We're long overdue, some Verity Explains. But also I saw some Verity dance moves this week, which was sensational.
So her father has a really cool little gym set up. So there I am running on the treadmill, doing whatever. And all she's doing is setting up her camera, trying to film herself dance. I'm like, not actually even doing a proper workout. Bloody hell.
It looks like a workout. I couldn't do it.
All right, listen, let's get to our fan of the week. We had a flurry of tweets from Ryan Kirby. He's at USA Rugby Fan 18, and he asked us several questions. So let's get right to it. The first question he asked, he said, what are your thoughts starting the Sevens stop in 2021, and should they maybe have mini tournaments or specific location areas so that the women and men aren't rusty in May? Robin, I'll go first with this one. It's a great question and great insight. Obviously, COVID has affected how we take part in contact sport. So, look, I think the only way is to go into a bubble, kind of like what they did did for the Bermuda World 10 series, where players went there, got tested, and were able to isolate. And even with that in mind, one of the teams had some players infected, so that they had to sit out of that tournament currently. They'll take part once they're safe to do so. So, look, I think as far as countries' preparation go, they're going to have to prep on their own, have some contact sessions with each other, with local teams maybe in the area in a safe environment, as opposed to going to these tournaments. Because the tricky part about the World Series is that you go from one tournament to another. So you change location during it. You can't just be in one bubble and stay there and play unless they made tweaks to that, so that's definitely a financial challenge.
Well, I think we should all move to New Zealand during this time, self-isolate for a few weeks or a few years. That's fine, and make the most of it. No, I agree. I mean, we really need to be solution orientated in how we do this, and maybe only have certain teams that come from certain parts of the world that are less effective. Maybe they centralize for a bit, get all cleared, then travel safely somewhere. Again, quarantine a bit, similar to Bermuda, and then maybe introduce more teams as those respective countries and governing bodies see fit. And I think the way New Zealand's done is perfect. I know in Canada, heavier numbers in the higher populated areas are obviously getting hit more. Also on Vancouver Island, our numbers are very low, but we're affected by our provincial government, essentially. Our numbers go into the same numbers as downtown Vancouver, Toronto, right? So it's really about having regional solution-oriented focus so we can get back on the field.
So now let's go. Question number 2. 5 teams that are golden to snag the gold medal in Tokyo at the Olympic Games, and 5 dark horses. All right, I'll start. For the men's side, the form currently is with New Zealand, Fiji, South Africa, and then, of course, Great Britain. See how that team comes together. They were superb last time. And I'm going to have to put my USA in that group as well. The dark horses, France, who had some brilliant moments in the World Series, as well as Australia, Argentina. Samoa is definitely a dark horse. And Canada, who finished off the Vancouver Sevens, like we mentioned, in sublime form. So that's the crazy thing about the men's side of the Olympic Games, is that one of those 10 sides could definitely take it. For the women's side, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, France, and USA. Those are the 5 sides that are always in and out of the mix. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Number 1, Canada. Absolutely. Number 2, New Zealand. They're on form and consistent. USA, again, never thought I would cheer for the USA, but yeah, really supportive of North American rugby. And obviously they've been on form the last few years with Mike Friday. Fiji, always, and South Africa. For me, the dark horses are the North American teams, and the consistent teams have been New Zealand, Fiji, and South Africa for me. For the women's side, the Canadian women for gold, of course, USA for silver, and New Zealand for bronze. Dark horses, I would like to say Fiji for the women and Brazil.
I like it a lot.
I like an underdog.
Question 3, thoughts on the loss of the England and Wales men's sevens programs? Why don't you kick us up with that one?
I feel for the players, I feel for the staff, and I feel for the World Series. I hope it's temporary. I understand where countries financially are in hardships, but again, we have to be solution oriented. Hopefully it'll make the Great Britain players and essentially the Welsh and the English and the Scottish, be closer, because they're having to work off the field to fight for their programs. And I wish them all the best of it. But I mean, obviously I don't support it at all. I think sevens is the greatest game on earth. And I think the World Series is so important culture for sport and for opportunity to develop players to go on to play 15s and 15s World Cup. So it's, as I think we touched on it last week with New Zealand's Caleb Clark, he cut his teeth on the World Series with the All Blacks, as did many other great players that may not have broke through the way they did. And for him to be performing at 21 years old, he was destined for greatness, but having played in front of those big crowds around the world has set him up for success to accelerate his development. And I think that's the same for every men and women on the World Series.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that as a tool for developing players. And I think you're spot on, though. A different financial model needs to be looked at for these sides to stay in competition, and whether that's getting corporate funding involved as well. Because again, you go in the Sevens World Series, that is, from a sponsor point of view, it's an unbelievable setting to go into these different countries and different markets and have your players exposed all year round as well is another opportunity. So that certainly needs to happen. All right, let's go to the fourth and final question, and that's thoughts on the controversial sevens layout that everyone was up in arms about. Was this something new, or were they trying to fit everyone in on the same weekend? So he's referring to the men's and women's Sevens series playing together for some of the stops on the Sevens World Series, which we know is quite challenging. 28 teams competing, one stadium, one weekend. It's a lot for the fans. It's a lot for the broadcast. It's a lot on the players. Robin, what are your thoughts on that?
I like the concept of having them together, having them united. I like that the women have an opportunity to play in front of a greater crowd. What I don't appreciate with it is the lack of games and the inconsistency from one tournament to the next. Say they don't go well on a weekend, they can play 3 games or 4 games tops, as opposed to playing a minimum of 5 for the men and the women. Also, I've been on, I've coached on the women's side of things, and at the last World Cup as well, where we only played 3 games or 4 games. And we're traveling across the world. We're in Hong Kong, and we obviously didn't top our pool. We've flown across the world. We prepared for 6 months, and we only played 3 games. So I like the idea of it, but I don't think the actual rugby being played for the fans and for the athletes experience to grow is the greatest.
I think it's extremely challenging, as you said. Some had suggested that the men's side should go from 16 teams to 12 teams, which then, does reduce the number of matches, which you exactly pointed out, which I also don't like. I also don't like, though, that 4 teams then would be missing out on the Sevens World Series on the men's side of things. That development of their game would certainly struggle, but particularly playing only a few tournaments in the Challenger Series as well. But I do like, though, that the World Series has some combined events and some events that are standalone as well. So it gives an opportunity for those teams on the women's and the men's side to play all those matches as well. It's definitely a tricky one, and again, we'll have to stay tuned to see how things develop next year. So if you have any questions for us, you want anything discussed, definitely let us know, and we might as well just quickly comment on the Bermuda World 10 series. That looks pretty special.
Yeah, did you have a chance to see any of the games last weekend?
I saw a little bit, yeah. I saw a little bit from time to time. I watched some of the highlights as well. It was good to see Rob Bickerman on the call there as well. And, of course, what a setting. Bermuda, I mean, just jealous of all these folks on the beach carving it up.
Yeah, I've had an opportunity to go there with the classics and just cruising around in the sun on scooters is a dream come true. I had Jimmy Buffett in my ears the whole way. I'm just happy to see rugby happening. Again, that solution-oriented approach that the organizers have taken and the island welcoming them. Day one for me, the games were a bit untidy and maybe the fitness wasn't there. And plus these guys have never played together before. But it kind of grew over there. Just want to give Nick Taylor a shout out. So Nick's a Lindenwood grad, recently drafted by the Seattle Seawolves. And I've been working with him while COVID was shut down distance wise in the build up to once he was selected to play. And then his team won the first round. So really proud of that young future MLR star.
There's a lot of young talent too. Robin, one thing I did like, which was so interesting, was I am a traditionalist when it comes to the sport of rugby, but this is kind of nice because this is 10, so it's slightly different. And again, the laws are the same. I love the idea of conversion jeopardy. You can decide to kick a conversion from the halfway line and it's worth 5 points, or you can go right in front of the poles and kick it over for 1 point. So it depends what you need in the game. And that does create a bit of excitement where if you are down by 10 points, you can technically score a try and kick a 5-point conversion, which I saw Ben Seamer do and a couple others. How's your kicking?
I think it's an athletic therapy nightmare because these guys are essentially playing a 7 style game and haven't played in a long time. And then they're trying to pull it out from a mile away. So it might be tough in the next few weeks, but yeah, it's good for the fans and it adds some excitement. And tactically, I'm interested from a coaching aspect. You coach are these coaches coming from 15s or 7s or a hybrid? I'm seeing a lot of 15s. And so I'm excited to watch as the weeks progress to see how the coaches adapt and the players adapt to strategize. But really excited to see top players like DTH and a few other athletes around the world. So rugby's happening live in a tropical place. You can't beat it.
Can't wait for next year as well. 2021, they said they're going to be at 12 different locations. So it'll be really cool. Got to warm up the one-liners because there'll be some hot stepping happening there. All right, my friend. Support for the Rugby Hive podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Keep the change, Robin.
You can get 20% off and free shipping with the code Rugby Hive at manscaped.com. That's 20% off, free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the code Rugby Hive. Your balls will thank you. I had a number of people reach out to me over the last week after our intro and say that they've heard of Manscaped. they've always wanted to purchase it, and they used our code already and got after it. And for me, I was blown away because it's probably the most message I've ever got after podcast. So thank you, Manscaped, for supporting us. I know for all those fans out there, your balls will thank you.
Absolutely love it. And then we want a couple other thank yous as well. Focus Care Products. They sent me some massive spray bottles of sanitizer just ahead of what some are calling the second wave. So visit focuscareproducts.com. Check out some of the amazing wellness range. We'll send yours through to you, Robin, as well. We also want to thank Gilbert Rugby Canada. Now, those of you that are obviously watching on YouTube can see Robin's shirt. It's the sleekest shirt I've ever seen him wear. Rugby Hive embroidered, Gilbert on the side. It's black, it's gold, it's amazing. It's worth $1 million. And down the line, we're going to have them available. I'll be wearing mine. For now, I'm wearing a Free Jack shirt, but we'll get the Rugby Hive clothing on too. Final thank you to Brand Marinette as well for keeping us well manicured in all the gear that we wear. Follow us on the socials at Rugby Hive on Twitter and Facebook, at My Rugby Hive on Insta. Time now for episode 17. Clark, thanks so much for joining us from New Zealand. How are you coping during this time, my friend?
Good day, fellas. Good to see you both. And yeah, it's been strange times, hasn't it, for everybody in the world. I suppose a little bit unusual when we're all in the same boat. You know, it's the first time in our lifetime that everybody's sort of been feeling the same things, you know, around the challenges. And yeah, we're all good down here. New Zealand's so far, I've done an amazing job from the government and leadership through Prime Minister and her advisors, you know, going early around a shutdown and a lockdown around our borders and getting everybody inside. And, you know, it certainly feels like New Zealand's done a really good job, I guess. So compared with some parts of the world, I think we're pretty good. And you know, me as a family, we're going good.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are you doing to keep busy outside of, you know, the general rugby stuff?
Yeah, well, a wife and 3 kids getting homeschooled is keeping me on my toes. It has been really interesting, you know, being at home, as you fellas know, both involved with sevens and rugby. You're on the road a lot. So to have an extended period, not only at home, but actually stuck in your house. You know, we went into lockdown when we came home from Vancouver, the team that travelled. So that's about 7 weeks, I think, I've been at home now. So, you know, there's been a range of emotions and ups and downs. It's certainly not felt like 7 weeks, you know, about staying busy. There's been a lot to do around the game and around our team, a lot to do, you know, off the field. There's some massive challenges, you know, ahead for not only rugby, but for rugby sevens around the world and sport in general, isn't there? So yeah, it's certainly been busy. As I say, the homeschooling's having mixed results. You know, we some days we're going good, some days not so much.
That's awesome. So, Clark, just for our listeners out there, how long have you lived in New Zealand in total? And what are some of the main differences from a life in Scotland and a life in New Zealand? There's probably a couple.
First moved to New Zealand in 2008, you know, a while ago now. I was here till 2015, then I was back in London for 2 years, and then came back to New Zealand in 2017. So, you know, 10 years here as well as a couple of years in London. So it's quite a long time. You know, we left for 1 year. I told my wife we would go for 1 year, we'd go back to Scotland. So it hasn't quite worked out like that. She reminds me every now and again. But, you know, Scotland and New Zealand, there's some massive similarities around, you know, the people are pretty similar and down to earth and pretty straightforward. You know, big agricultural, rural town, you know, it's historically been major strengths of both New Zealand and Scotland, not only to the economy, but, you know, to the rugby field. So, you know, there's some real similarities around that. But, you know, there's some huge differences here. The weather and the lifestyle is far more outside. You know, the sporting landscape in New Zealand's, I think, far more inclusive around boys and girls and school sport, after school sport. There's certainly a big difference to, I was lucky when I grew up in Scotland, there was still, you know, a lot of sport at school, but that's changed over the last 20 years or so. So, you know, there's some real differences in that, just around the lifestyle, the sort of relaxed nature of Kiwis are, you know, their natural instincts to be nice and relaxed and to have a reasonably positive and optimistic outlook. You know, they work hard when they need to and they like to switch off and relax. And they've got a great country to be able to do that around the oceans and the lakes and the mountains. So there's certainly a lot of outdoor activity. Really similar to Canada in a lot of ways. I think that's why, you know, our team really enjoy coming to Vancouver. So the other things that I sometimes forget about is the different cultures in New Zealand. You know, there is that in Scotland, but, you know, in the main, certainly where I lived, you know, we were all brought up European white kids, you know, Scottish kids, whereas here, the Maori influence and the Pacifica influence within the communities and certainly in the landscape I work in and, you know, and operate in, there's some real differences there around what that brings, you know, on and off the field. I think, you know, when you talk about work and talk about the game and society, that's probably one of the key differences.
Yeah, there's definitely a rich culture in New Zealand, and also just how important that Maori culture is and the Pacific Island culture is within the sport. That's something we're trying to tap into in North America as well. We've got some inroads with some of the local programs in different regions and trying to empower our Indigenous cultures. How's your Sevens program coping, both the players and staff, with what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a range of emotions and how we've coped. Initially when we first got back from Vancouver, I guess we thought, maybe a couple of weeks and we would crack on, and, we still had the Olympics. So obviously as tournaments were starting to get knocked off around Hong Kong and so on, get cancelled, the hope was obviously that Olympics would go ahead. But obviously in hindsight, there was never a chance that was going to happen now that we've seen what the last months showed us. So I think there was some massive disappointment, and, some raw emotion around that, because we've all been working really hard for 3.5 years, all teams, men's and women's, we're no different. But, we felt we've got into a really good spot ready to launch into that last 5-6 months to genuinely try and peak in Tokyo. So, and I guess as we're coming out the other side, we've hit a wee bit of a survival mode, within sport around finance and stuff. So I think that's where we're at the minute. The team and management are in a really good spot. They're staying really optimistic and positive. And ironically, I think a lot of the work we've done off the field around our culture and who we are as people and who we are as individuals, around our own identities and the team's identities, really set us up for this time. We thought it was to try and win an Olympic medal, but ironically, it's probably really helping us at the minute. We feel really fortunate around that side of our team.
Yeah, we're going to get into your culture in a little bit as well, but let's rewind it back a little bit. Personally, your career as a player, can you give us some of your favorite highlights?
Yeah, plenty of lowlights. I'm fortunate. I come from a town called Jedburgh. It's a real rugby town. So Jed Forest, the rugby club. So, we weren't a successful 15s team, but we used to win a lot of sevens tournaments. And I guess that's where my love of sevens originated. So I used to love playing for Jed and winning sevens tournaments. We were never lucky enough to win the Melrose tournament, that everybody probably knows. But we did win our home tournament and Kings of the Sevens, which was a little circuit we used to have every year of 10 tournaments, a little bit similar to the World Series, but around the border towns in Scotland. So, I was lucky with that. And then Scotland Sevens, definitely the Commonwealth Games and World Cup 05, 06 was, through that period, hugely enjoyable. Managed to play, 25 tournaments, I think it was all that, but played a lot through that period. I think it was 18 tournaments I played over the 2.5 years. And, I love being involved in the series. We battled at times as Scotland. We had to fight and scrape to go from 4th seed to 3rd seed, eventually got up to 2nd seed for a few tournaments. We made, I think it was 6 out of 8 quarterfinals and got beat off New Zealand in 4, lost to Argentina in 1 and South Africa in 1. So we never actually made a semi-final that whole time, which was frustrating. But I think the Commonwealth Games and World Cup, to be involved in 06, I was picked in 02 and got injured 5 days before the tournament. I'd had a knee injury and it just didn't come right. So I ended up having to pull myself out of the 2002 in Manchester. So then to come back, I went through 15s for a couple of years, and to come back and be involved in 06 in Melbourne, even though we didn't play well, we lost our team. Was it Canada? We didn't play well at all. We actually played really well in Hong Kong a couple of weeks after it in Singapore. So that was a little bit frustrating, but it was certainly a great experience being involved in a Commonwealth Games, being involved in a Scottish team that had people like Chris Hoy, who was, an Olympic gold medalist, a Commonwealth Games gold medalist, cyclist, track cyclist. It was a huge hero of ours to watch him, and be involved in that team was awesome.
Yeah, Clark, I was actually going through some old memoirs now. I also got time to sort things out, right? All the old memorabilia over the years. And I found a program from 2006. It was the USA Sevens in LA. Your name was on the Scottish team. Robin's name was on the Canadian team. And I remember I was in the reserve pool when back then the host nation supplied, 10 or 12 players to sit on the side, and because I wasn't eligible yet for the US. So yeah, all three of us actually were there at that time. Kind of funny situation, right?
It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, going back to the Commonwealth Games. So our technical director, but one of our coaches, Doug Tate, who's a University of Victoria coach, and he played for Canada and coached Canada forever, but he's one of my mentors and just the biggest beauty ever. But he never really had like a tactical thing that he stuck with us. He was pretty just like, train us to play what's in front of us and stuff. But he's also a genius. I remember watching ice hockey with him one time on a ferry boat, and he picked apart something in the hockey game. And I said, Doug, like, did you ever coach hockey or play hockey? No. I watched it a couple times, but he just has this brain. But who's the big ginger captain for you guys at that time in sevens?
Yeah, Mark Lee.
Mark Lee. So Doug, like back then it was VHS or DVD or something. But anyway, Doug picked apart. The only thing we talked technically, the only meeting we had at the Commonwealth Games in the Athletes Village was you guys used to throw this over the top ball to the fly half or Mark Lee. And that was the only thing Doug had picked off because we played against you guys in, if you were in Wellington, in the bowl final, you guys beat us. And a few other times throughout the year, Doug had picked apart that there's this ball that went right over the top of the line out and you'd hit the 10. Anyhow, we practiced it. It was our only game plan we had for the whole Commonwealth Games. And our fly half, our first receiver, Mike Danskin, sawed your first receiver, Mark Lee, in half. And we picked it off. We scored. We won. But it was just I was just so impressed by my coach because the only time he ever had any tactics, it was that. And we were lucky enough just to sneak by you at the death. But
yeah, sometimes sevens is like that, isn't it? It's that one moment. It doesn't necessarily take, we all know that. It's such fine lines. And you're right, I think it was a score in that game. So we had some great games against Canada. I remember Hong Kong, a really tight game. I remember that game in LA. It was a really tight game. Wellington I think it was a score in that game, maybe two. So it was, we were both teams that were vying for that sort of, 8-7 sort of spot. It was, there's some good teams in and around that middle part of the World Series in those times.
Yeah, we never made it past the quarterfinal in my time either. So
no.
New Zealand would always break our heart.
Yeah, we were the same. And
then Clark, how did you transition then into coaching? What was your first interest in that and how did you get started?
When I was playing sevens, I ended up doing rugby development. So for Jed Forrest, at the time they had club development officers. So really that allowed me to train, more or less full time for sevens as well as go around the local schools. And, I was lucky, you maybe had a guy called Richie Gray that's been involved with the Collision Kings. That was his little baby with the Rhino making those Collision Kings. So he was a sort of mentor and a rugby development officer that looked over the borders area. So he sort of upskilled, because I was a mechanical engineer when I left school. I had no teacher training, obviously passionate around rugby, but I didn't really have any idea how to coach. So I was lucky in that early part, and then I worked for a East Lothian Council, which was a sports development team. That again, I was really lucky. There was a lot of people that knew how to organise sports events or tournaments, or I'd never even really sent emails or nothing leading up to that point. So that kind of got me into rugby development, and was a great. I still think I'd love to see ex-players that want to get into coaching go down that route a little bit, because it gives you a really good base and a foundation around coaching different people, different genders, different ages. 8 kids turn up, 25 kids turn up. It gives you a real flexibility to how you coach. And then when I went to New Zealand in 2008, that was what I continued doing. So I was Taranaki rugby development officer when I first arrived, and then right place at the right time, I guess, within Taranaki that, allowed me to get into coaching adults. But, in Scotland I'd coached, under 18s, under 16s. I'd coached my club side as a player. My last year when I was playing in 2008, I became a player coach because the coaches finished up. So it was a real melting pot really initially around that rugby development. And then, as I say, in Taranaki, they had a new head coach in Colin Cooper, who had just come back from the Hurricanes 2009, I think it was the year after. Through the academy and so on, there was opportunities there. We coached the Taranaki Sevens team. That was the first team I coached in New Zealand. It was ironically a Sevens team too that we used for the Taranaki Academy. And we had an unbelievable group of players. Looking back now, Waisaki Nahola and Bowden Barrett will be 2 players that everybody knows. But we had 5 or 6 Super Rugby players, 2 All Blacks, Jamison Gibson Park that plays for Leinster now. He was a Hurricane. So, looking back, we had an unbelievable group of players that were in that team. But that's kind of how I got into the coaching, and then, from there, transition, I guess, into adult coaching through Taranaki.
And when you arrived, so you obviously had these, great players coming through and they would go on to do good things. Did anybody stop you and say, where are you from and what are you doing here with that crazy accent?
Not really. Taranaki was an odd, we got such good memories of Taranaki as a family, and on and off the field, at work. And the then CEO was Mark Robinson, who is now the New Zealand Rugby CEO. The academy manager was Mike Collins, who's now the Chiefs CEO. The fitness trainer was Davy Gray, who's the Hurricanes head trainer for 10 years now. The next fitness trainer was Aled Walters, who's been the Springbok fitness trainer at the World Cup. And then with another Scotsman that's went on to work for Po, Ian Cleland. So we had such amazing people that, we had such good fun. So, unless there was people behind my back talking about my strange accent, I think we did have Taranaki had a real melting pot of people. It wasn't, your traditional just New Zealand rugby and only Kiwis. There was already a Scotsman there. Jack Karifi was a Samoan guy that I worked with as a rugby development officer. So we had a huge amount of fun. Looking back now, we had not a lot of responsibility, and we played a lot of indoor cricket, drank coffee, and coached some rugby. So it was it was fun times. And I've always been really, really fortunate in New Zealand. It's felt there's always been people willing to give you an opportunity. I don't know if that surprised me right at the start. It is a good question. Did that surprise me? In some of the traditional countries, it feels like you have to knock away, for years and years. But within 2 or 3 years, I was working with the Taranaki team, worked with the New Zealand Sevens team. It really felt if you'd done a good job and you worked hard and you kept learning and progressing, people are really willing to give you an opportunity, which was great for me. I've loved that part of New Zealand. It's always felt that way to me.
And what mentors and coaches have influenced your coaching career?
Yeah, well, that's a good question too. Is when I was a player, so you boys maybe remember Rob Moffat coached the Sevens. So Rob was a Melrose man. He'd coached Edinburgh Rugby, or he went back and coached 15s again. He was a hugely optimistic, positive coach. So he was a massive influence on me as a player. And looking back now, he's had a massive influence on how I want to coach and how I want my players to feel. He was always gave you the confidence you were good enough and that we could. And that wasn't always the case in Scotland. We're not always the most optimistic race and the most positive race. But Rob was he was awesome looking back. I'll tell you a wee story. When we went to Singapore, and you boys have been to Singapore, and how hot and humid it is. And we got there, and it was the good old days when you got there about 4 days before you played, and we jogged across the field and back, and it was so humid and hot, and we were breaking out in a sweat, and we were like, how are we going to play rugby in this in like 3 days' time or 4 days' time? And Rob looked at us and he's like, oh, is it hot? We're like, oh, it's so hot. And he was like, what are you going to do? And we're like, oh, nah, nothing. He's like, well, shut up and get on with it. And I reckon that summed him up, and there was a guy, Bob Eason, who he actually managed the Sevens team, but he's a rugby coach and worked for the Institute of Sport in Scotland. And he was really analytical, skill-based coaching, creative, constraints. Like looking back now, some of the stuff he was doing was so far ahead of probably anywhere that it was happening at that time. So those two had a massive influence on me, how I thought it would go. And then probably Colin Cooper at Taranaki would be, the person that shaped me a lot in my younger adult coaching. So the first coach to work with in New Zealand, I worked with him for 3 or 4 years. And Coops has got, if you know that Maori word around mana, which is, massive character. He was really good for me as a younger coach that was full of beans and I guess pretty aggressive and pretty excitable. And, I used to fire up at stuff and he would let me, go off on one. But then eventually a day later or a couple of hours later, he would, ask me a really good question around it. So he really sort of, I don't know if he took the edge off me. I'm not sure if I ever lose my edge, but he certainly shaped me a lot, and somebody I had a massive amount of respect for as a man, both on and off the field. He was the first man first coach I'd really seen operate like that, as well as Rob around those relationships. And, just being a really good man that, it showed you don't have to be aggressive and angry. You can be really relaxed and calm, still get the effort and the output that you want from your players and your staff.
I like that style. And it's funny you say Rob, he's near and dear to my heart too. When I got an opportunity to finally play in the World Series, and I've told Dallen my long and winding road that it took me to realize my dream. But I just, as a small town Vancouver Island kid, I never took it for granted, and the experiences and the people, the places and things. And a lot of the boys on my side at that time, they would hang out within after competitions or in the hotel. And I could speak a few languages, so I would even connect with the French, and that was great. Some boys on the Samoan team, but always with the Scottish guys, and always Rob. I would find myself after a tournament having a quiet beer on the second leg in a corner with Rob Moffat picking his brain. And one half of my family is obviously Scottish, so that was super fascinating for me. And I kept in touch with him for years after, until he finished at the Scottish Union. But he at one point was trying to recruit me for the Gunners, or I was trying to get recruited, I guess, to play for the Gunners. Yeah. So what's he doing these days?
He's basically retired. So he actually went back. He eventually ended up working back at Merchiston School in Edinburgh, which is a private boys' school in Edinburgh, running the rugby program there. He did a bit of coaching with Romania with the guy Lynn Howell, I think it was, for the back end the last couple of years. So I've not actually spoken to him for a while. I've seen him briefly. I was back in Scotland last July, and we bumped into each other. There's local festivals on in Scotland in the summer, so we had a quick hug. And he was actually taking off. He was catching a bus But yeah, he's a good man. He's, maybe in these times I need to reach out to him, give him a wee text, catch up with him again.
Tell him I say hi and send him my best, please.
I will do, yeah.
So you touched on it last year in Vancouver and when you did a presentation. I'm going to touch on a few of those points, but obviously taking over from Sir Gordon Tietjens after 20 years in charge. So it's kind of a 2-point question, I guess, changing of the guard, changing culture. And then also, for me, I find it very inspiring for a Scottish coach to take over such a historical program as a Scotsman. So what was it like taking over for Gordon? Where was the culture? Where have you taken it?
Sometimes looking back, you don't really know what you know, so looking back now, at the time I probably felt a little bit nervous and a little bit excited. I guess it was, in one way, it was obviously going to be tough taking over from Titch because he'd been so successful with the teams, certainly through that middle part or early part, the middle part of his career was, we just touched on it, didn't we? New Zealand and Fiji were so far ahead of everybody. Other teams would chip in now and again, but the World Series, I genuinely believe this, the World Series wouldn't be where it is now without Titch and New Zealand, because Fiji would have run away with it, and nobody else really took it seriously around the world. And even within New Zealand rugby, it wasn't necessarily taken that seriously. It was Titch's passion and his enthusiasm that, generated a team, his selecting ability around finding these young players that produced a team that could beat Fiji, and that rivalry obviously still exists today. So I never think that should be underestimated around what Titch done for the Sevens. Not all on his own, but certainly his passion and his commitment to having a team that could compete with Fiji that eventually drove other teams to, South Africa, and the way Paul True and Neil Powell have took it, South Africa on, those three countries in particular have really driven the World Series and everybody trying to catch them up. It's there for everybody to see. Between sort of, 14 and 17, the team had really started to struggle around performances on the field, and that consistency, the teams I'm talking about have caught up and probably passed with centralisation and so on with Africa and Fiji with a natural talent and their ability to train together every day. So in some regards, it was a really good time to take over because the team, the program, players were really receptive to trying to do things different. I didn't come in with a deliberate plan to be doing things different, but certainly coming from professional 15s, coaching through the Hurricanes and London Irish, how I coached or how I wanted to set the weeks up or what we thought was important in the game or how we coached skill was a bit different to potentially how it had been getting coached or how the team had looked for the last wee while. So we had a lot of work to do around the culture and off field and build something, a real identity and a vision that we could be proud of. Because it hadn't been centralised, the team was fragmented. Those players come in from 15s, go off to 15s. It's sort of become a little air bubble, I suppose, of rugby. Some players would come in and go back out. Some would get stuck here. So a lot of the players felt that they came here because they couldn't make 15s or they'd been in 15s and they came back. It just didn't feel when I first started that a real identity to how we wanted to look as a team. So there was a bit, there was plenty of work to be done there. And we've obviously, we can talk about that if you want, but we've obviously, spent a lot of time on that and getting our identity and our vision, behaviours to a point where we're really proud of them and really happy with how that's going. We just try and get deeper on that each year and each tournament, and there's always opportunities to get it right, or there's always opportunities to trip up a little bit, but that's okay too. As long as we all understand where we're trying to get to and how we're trying to operate. And as a Scotsman, it didn't really hit me that much around. I'm not sure if I thought about it really. Back end of London Irish, obviously, I knew I'd got the job. I had to wait 6 months or so before I could finish up my second season at London Irish. I actually went to Twickenham when Scotland beat New Zealand in the last play. I thought I'd be way more excited to see Scotland beat New Zealand for the first time, but I'd already took the job with New Zealand, and I was reasonably disappointed to see us lose to Scotland for the first time. But when we came back, it was I don't know if you've seen it, but it was the British Lions tour here in 2017. So there was a massive hype around rugby, obviously, in the country. But the British Sky put a documentary called Beneath the Black. The guy Gemmell, I think he's originally a Kiwi, worked for British Sky. And anyway, they put a documentary that was based on the All Blacks, went all the way back to Dave Gallagher in the first tours. It looked at the different areas in New Zealand around the Maori influence, the Pacifica and the European. And obviously had little stories around, it used the barracks around the European. It obviously talked about Lomu and the first Pacific players coming into the All Blacks. And then obviously the strong Maori connection through the haka. And when I watched that documentary, that was the first time I thought, man, I've got to coach a team that represents all that. And that made me nervous because, I'd been in New Zealand before, but you're right, coaching New Zealand versus coaching a province or even a Super Rugby team did feel different. Going on the World Series also felt different. When you go with Scotland and you're not really a threat, it feels different to when you're, one of the top, 3 or 4 teams, or seen as one of the top 3 or 4 teams, even if we weren't quite there when we first started. So that documentary really gave me a wee uppercut around, what we were embarking on. And we actually used that documentary. The very first thing we done was we went to Raglan, which is a little West Coast surf town, and watched that documentary. So we really tried to anchor our culture and identity to our strengths, our point of difference, which is the different cultures within the country. We've got an amazing genetic pool with the Pacifica players, and with flair and with toughness of our Maori players, and we're European boys that have come from all over the world traditionally. Their grandparents or parents. So as I say, maybe naively hadn't thought too much about it, but I think the willingness for everybody to want to make change really helped us and really helped me, sort of fit in that first few months.
Well, as a Canadian that had an opportunity to work with Mexico for 5 years, and we've had a lot of foreign coaches involved in Canada, and they've had a lot of value here, and some have embraced the culture and some haven't embraced the culture. A big part of the Canadian culture is diversity. And when I got an opportunity to work with Mexico and eventually became head coach, I definitely wanted to embrace the culture, even to involved in getting kit suppliers and designing the kit, or getting some of the athletes to get some of their family to design the kit, and, tapping into the Aztec warrior culture. And we had it on display in the Sevens World Cup a few years ago. And they said I was more Mexican than the Mexicans by the end of it, proudly. It's because it's such a warm place. But, definitely wherever you go in the world, you got to embrace it. And if you're going to get anyone to buy into what you believe in, you have to understand what they believe in and understand them. And I think you're doing a great job of that so far. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're on the money. It's, I guess that's those experiences and getting to travel. All 3 of us get to travel and experience different cultures. And, we make a point, as a team when we're away, to always create opportunities within the weeks to get out and see the places. Traditionally some of the Sevens teams have locked themselves away in hotels, and, it's a tough week when you got to recover and get ready to play in short spells. But, we're only passing through, aren't we? We're not going to be here forever. So we need to make sure we enjoy it and see different cultures and enjoy it.
So you touched on it earlier. So when you're coaching New Zealand, what does it feel like when you come up against Scotland on the Sevens World Series?
Yeah, well, as I say, that time I wasn't even coaching New Zealand, really. I was reasonably disappointed. My first ever time with the team back in 2011, when I worked as an assistant, or I'd say an assistant, probably more a skills coach and video analyst with Titch, was against Scotland in Wellington. And Mark Lee, who was the captain, as you asked the question before, Robin, was the manager for Scotland Sevens, and me and his nickname is Scruff. Well, he's got a few nicknames. His nickname Scruff, which is a mascot back in the day that we thought he looked like. But anyway, so he was a manager, and it felt strange because one of your best mates, genuine best mates, is in opposition, and the country grown up with and played for, especially when you've played for the team. It certainly felt a little bit strange, but I guess it's like anything, isn't it? When you play against your brother or play against your best mate, play against your own country, it probably makes you want to win even more. I've got a lot of respect for the Scotland Sevens programme. The whole time I've been involved, Carl McRae was the coach who I played with. Then John Dallen was actually somebody I grew up with. My auntie used to live next door to him in a different town. So John done an amazing job, I thought, with the Sevens team. And now Kieran Beattie and Sean Lamont, who you fellas maybe played against, was Kieran and Sean both went to the Commonwealth Games. So I'd played with. So, we're really good, really good mates off the field. But as I say, it's a wee bit of a strange feeling, but it's probably one of those ones where you feel like you want to win. I really want my best mates back home giving me a hard time for losing to Scotland. But, I genuinely, I don't feel like we want to win or play any different because we're playing against Scotland, because then it would be my ego, wouldn't it? It'd be my ego that would be worrying about losing. So I think Scotland Sevens, as I say, I genuinely think that when you look at how little a programme they've got and how few players have got contracted, and they don't travel with a massive amount of staff and so on, I think they do an amazing job and they're always competitive. We've had a maybe 3 games this year in the 6 tournaments against them, and Cape Town played them in the quarter final, and it was a pretty tough game for a while, and we always have to play well against Scotland because I know and that we've got big tickers, we've got big heart, we've got big they never give up. Cape Town was a good example where we were well in front, and then I think they scored 3 tries the last 3 plays of the game and sort of came back at us. So as a Scotsman, that makes you proud that they don't give up, and we played well obviously in Cape Town that day. So yeah, it does feel a wee bit strange at times, but I guess you're used to it now.
But who does your wife cheer for when New Zealand's playing Scotland?
Yeah, New Zealand.
That's good.
My girls are a bit of a mongrel mob. So my youngest one, she's fully Scottish. She was born there, but it's obviously been brought up here. My middle one was born in New Zealand, and my youngest one was born in England. So, the black jersey sort of unites that 3-2. They're all a wee bit different. But we had an awesome day this year at Hamilton when we managed to win, and we had friends and family there. But we were able to bring them in the changing room after. We had my girls in the field. And it's always cool winning, but it's those sort of memories. You really remember how we played against France in the final. That's the stuff I remember. The boys singing in the changing room after with their wives there and having a couple of beers, and it's maybe why we didn't play as well in Sydney the week after. But it was worth it.
Now, Tommy, you spoke about the team's culture. It's always fascinating to hear that. How would you summarize the All Black way?
We've got a really strong vision and a commitment. Visions to inspire people by what they hear, see, and feel. Everything we do is trying to live up to that. The players have got an awesome commitment statement that they developed. That is, we'll work beneath the black so we can stand amongst the black to one day live and breathe all black. So the players drive that side of it and try and live up to the vision around inspiring people. We've got certain behaviours around positive, effort, and humility. So there are 3 behaviours that we try and do in everything we do. So from on field to off field, to how we interact with you, to how we interact with people at hotels. That's how we try and live up to it. So I'd love the team when we move on to continue to live like that, and have a really a strong identity to the 3 areas of the country that we've talked about. We weave all that in around our Pacifica and our Maori and our European. Our rugby language is linked to the 3 different areas. Around our defence is Maori, our attacks Pacifica, with Tomasi Thama coaching that, our set piece and breakdowns European. So there's a lot of strands to our culture. There's a lot of traditions and rituals that we try and weave into our training weeks and our preparation weeks and our tournament weeks that give it real depth, I guess. Because it's easy, most teams have, they have the same stuff. We're not unique to have a vision, and a commitment statement. We're not unique to have behaviours or values that we stick on our posters and, and put on our training sheets and so on. But we genuinely try and drive it with our leaders and our staff to then drive it with the players. We select heavily based off that. So we try and select players that really fit what we're looking for. There's players that went out the team over the last 3 years that I can genuinely say has been more around off field and character to how we want to do it. It's not necessarily got bad character or they just struggle to live like that every day, or they choose they don't want to. Doesn't mean to say they're not good rugby players or they couldn't fit another team. And I guess that's the thing about our culture is it's not for anybody else. It's just for us. It's our way of doing things. It's our way of preparing. It's our way of getting deep and connected as a group. Could you replicate that with another team? Then probably not. And we wouldn't try to. And it's become really unique, I think. Around how close the group's got. I think Sevens does that. It's an intense environment, and my mates from say back home, I've got 2 or 3 schoolmates that I'd get in touch with, and 2 or 3 guys I play Sevens with. And they'd be similar. Around who you'd get in touch with, and it's a bit similar here where that intensity of only 20 contracted players. We've had 24 this year, 13 travel. It's you fellas know that it's a really intense, close knit group that allows, if you get your culture right and be accountable to it, then you can really make it quite deep and really personal to the group.
Touching on just the beginning, every time you welcome somebody new into the group, those listeners out there, to get a deeper understanding for those, I'll say young coaches, but I'll say all coaches. What really took me back from your presentation I took in Vancouver in 2019 was when you spoke about the way you welcome people into your culture, into your team, and ultimately your family with new players.
Yeah, well, I guess that's how we try and bring them in. They're part of our family, and we try and look after them. So if it's a young player that's got a mum or a dad, we had we've got a couple of young players that nobody's seen yet on the World Series. You'll get to see them next year. Who, when they come with their mums and dads, or we go to their house and meet them. We're younger players. We'd always go and try and meet their parents first, even before we contract them if we can, because we think that's really important that the parents get an understanding of what I'm talking about around our culture and how we do stuff. Because sometimes they've got multiple decisions around university or Super Rugby or academies, and sevens might only be one option. So we need to make sure that they hear from us how we want to run the team and how we're going to look after their young son. So we would always do that first. If they come we try and get our leaders to meet them when they arrive, to make sure they've got, a Scott Curry or a Tim Mickelson or a Kurt Baker, Shiona Malia, meet them and bring them into the group. They're obviously welcomed in. We do a lot of singing in our group, so they have to get up to speed pretty quickly. But really the integration part is we have a strong induction, what we're after and what we're looking for and how we do stuff. We try and make them feel as comfortable as possible, as quick as possible. And we really, have a massive amount of care to make sure a young player knows it's okay to come here and make mistakes, and he should be making mistakes. We've seen that in the past with some of our younger players. They get really nitty. Like Anthony Nanai Saturu was a great example when he came from school. An amazing athlete as an 18-year-old, and he didn't get picked for the Commonwealth Games, and we gave him some feedback. And one of the things he said to us was he was really scared about making mistakes, and so we had to say, look, mate, you're 18, you should be here making mistakes every day and as many as you possibly can. I want to see you try and make as many mistakes. And that one conversation freed up Anthony to the point where we got a couple of injuries going to the Commonwealth Games, and he ended up coming over and playing. But he was like a different rugby player. He was communicating, he was smiling, he was having fun, and that unlocked that part of it. So, when new players come, we need to make sure, and we've not always got that right. Looking back now, you can see, Anthony was a good example where we probably spent, 4 or 5 months not really connecting enough with them. And because we just centralised that year, so that induction, leaders meeting them, bringing them in, maybe a development team, we've really tidied that up now. So when a player comes, we've got young Jacob Nepkins, who you'll probably see next season on the World Series, come from Taranaki. It feels like he's been there because he came into a development team, learned some of our songs, gets to see players, plays alongside our players. So by the time he came into our team this year, it felt like he'd been there before, but he's only 18, and then, we've got some cool traditions around. We've got a fish hook and a sevens fish hook when you get your first cap. We've got some really good traditions now around milestone tournaments, around 50, and, same as most teams will do, I guess, around those things. So really that's a process, but it's took us 2 or 3 years to get that right, I reckon. But, that care to make sure we really look after them when they first come in, because as they find their feet, we obviously have to have a bit of edge and make sure, they're working hard and they're trying to get better in the right areas, and they're bringing their own strengths to the game. So it's important to understand, we've got their back, and the players have got their back initially, so they can express themselves and really fit in as quick as possible.
Yeah, and I guess if they're coming in, if they've been recruited by the All Black Sevens, obviously they're at the right level. They have the natural ability and the work ethic. It's taking the pressure off them to spread their wings and learn. I'm involved with the Canadian women's, often the Canadian women's sevens, as well as the men, the last few years, and I've done a lot of recruiting talent ID across the country, and up until this, like yourself, I hadn't been home much, but now that we've kind of finalized our selection with this with the upcoming girls going into the program in September, and I connected with a few of them over the last few weeks. And Robin, I'm just so nervous to come in, and I need to make sure my passing is good as Ghislaine Landry and Kayla Moleshki. And I'm like, listen, these women have been in the program for 10 to 15 years. Like, these are some of the best players in the world. So our expectations aren't that you're at that level yet. Definitely work on your pass and catch and some of your skills, and keep your cardio high and all the rest of it, and we can support you in the lead up to it. But our expectations are realistic with you coming in, just like we were realistic of them, 10, 15 years ago. But it's always daunting, putting yourself in their shoes. And, we all remember our first camps, and try not to ask guys for autographs, when you first show up. But just another question for you is how have you adapted, going from, I guess, playing sevens to playing 15s, and then now coaching sevens, coaching 15s, and then now back to sevens. So as a coach, how do you adapt, and how do you change your style or philosophy as far as the tactics?
I always remember when you played, when you went back from sevens to 15s, you felt claustrophobic. You felt like everybody was, right next to you. I think as a coach, my philosophies and how I coach and even in the game are reasonably similar. There's some obvious differences to the game from 15s to sevens. I did notice when we first came back to sevens, you'd be thinking of activities or drills, and then you'd be like, man, I've got nowhere near enough players for that drill or that game. Or so I had to adjust, pretty quickly with that. Having Tomasi Thama involved saved the team a bit, especially the early part on the field. Being involved in 15s and in sevens, I think really doesn't matter which way you end up going. I think I'll end up going back into 15s eventually and coaching 15s, hopefully, if I'm good enough and get the right opportunity. But I think that they can marry up really nicely if you can use both their strengths and not get fixated on, oh, well, we only do this in sevens or we only do that in 15s. So the flexibility, the fast, intense nature of 6 game plans on one weekend, where 15s you take a whole week to build a game plan and train against a certain defence or certain pictures. Sevens players have got to adapt to that 6 times on a weekend. But what that does is gets you really clear on what your own game needs to look like as opposed to worrying about opposition. So, there's something you can take back to 15 straight away. The individual skill that's involved in sevens 100% transfers into 15s because it's all the same core skills. I think the benefit of coming from 15s and working with, London Irish with nearly 50 players, Hurricanes with 40 or 38 players. So trying to get all, if you coach a defence or an attack, trying to get all those players on the same page is a huge challenge, isn't it? To London Irish, we played like 40 weekends in a row. So there were some massive challenges within that around work ethic and analysis and building a game and working with players that you can then take into 15s, around building a game plan over 2 or 3 years to know where you want to get to and know what it might look like and try and plan ahead. And so I really think the two, and I'm biased because I've done both. I think people that say you can't do both are people that have never done it. And I genuinely think that you can take a lot of the philosophies you've got in the game in 15s, like being a square defender. So in sevens, traditionally, even when I first got to New Zealand, all the defence was across the field. It was like even the last defender was side on. I thought he was going to tackle the ball person or the touch judge. And we're asking the players, like, who are you taking? So when you come from England and you've had, hard, flat defences, high wingers, square defenders, you obviously can't quite take that into sevens. But a lot of the philosophies around your width and your alignment and your spacing, you can really take in to improve your sevens defence. So, I'm really open to both sides of the game. We've certainly used that. Our third coach is a guy called Liam Barry, who coached the Blues in North Harbour. He's coached in Japan. He knew nothing about sevens. He's a 15s coach. None. Never played sevens, never coached sevens. But we felt he coaches our set piece and breakdown, and he's starting to help me in the defence. And it gives us a really good, well, why do you do that? Why do you not do this? Why do you do that? I remember our first meet, Tomasi and Liam's first meeting, we watched New Zealand versus Russia, Dubai, the year before. And I think it was close to 2 hours to get through the one game. We're like, right, we'll watch Dubai today and, we'll chip through the tournaments. It took us 2 hours to watch one game. We had to go for a couple of coffees after it. We were spent. But because he would be like, well, why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? And then Tomasi was like, oh, well, you can't do this. You can't. And we went, well, why? So it really generated a great launching pad for us to question, Tomasi's thinking around, because this is a sevens game and this is what we do, to question Liam's thinking, well, can that 15s? And I guess my job, because I've been involved in both, it really allowed me to sit in the middle and listen to ideas from 15s and listen to why things work in sevens. And I guess as the head coach, try and marry that up between the two, as well as with the players. Because a lot of players have got similar backgrounds around playing both, and have really tried to use that within our game plans and our tactics. So,
well, it's just having that fresh perspective. A lot of what I've done is I've shadowed other sports coaches, coaching at a university in parts of Canada for 10 years. And I would just go hang out at the basketball practices. And I'd listen to this coach. He's in his 60s and been around forever. Rugby and basketball, specifically sevens and basketball, there's a lot of similarities. Same thing with soccer, as you say, football, but just about creating space and working off the ball. For basketball players, at any given time they're on the court, their hands are ready. and their hips are square and they're on their toes. They're in an athletic position, where a lot in North America, if I don't have the ball, it's like people are just taking a nap. They're checked out as opposed to being checked in. Obviously the athletes that have kind of that mindset. So, and then from skill set in North America, a lot of rugby players or hockey, American football or soccer players, crossover athletes, essentially, not long-term developed rugby players. So from a skill set, not too many people can properly catch and pass because they haven't learned that skill properly. And I question them. How many basketball players, you go to any schoolyard and you'll see boys and girls of all ages, they can do a layup off the right or left. They can catch pass perfectly. They can shoot a free throw, no problem. And coaching indoors in the middle of Canada, it's -40 outside, Clark. You don't want to go there in the winter, but yeah, it's about 4 feet of snow. So we have to coach indoors, and they're all crossover university men's athletes. And a lot of times I'd coach during lunch hour. And there was this one basketball girl the last 2 years I was there, and every day she'd be there with her coach for an hour shooting 3-pointers from the same spot every day. And in 3 years, I never saw her miss one. And I got these boys running around the gym, firing balls every which way. And I always just slow them down, do the little things over and over again qualitatively. But yeah, I know it's so interesting to get those fresh perspectives, because the biggest thing is them asking you why. So I love that.
So great to hear that from your side, because you're right. Sometimes we're so fixated with what we know and what we do that it's just so nice to get that outside person coming in and helping us. Yeah,
we've done that this year in our off season. We sent our games, 6 games we won and 6 games we lost, to rugby coaches, not sevens coaches. And we're really lucky in New Zealand with a couple of really good people we knew that are really good rugby thinkers to have a look at our games and tell us what they've seen. I've seen this great thing. I've been watching a few podcasts from the UK, and they talked about the naive expert. I didn't even know what that meant, but I do now, because that's what we done. We sent it to rugby coaches that were naive to sevens, but they were certainly experts in the game. And all we asked them was, tell us what you see. We give them no criteria, no anchoring to nothing. And they gave us a couple of great things around this year where we thought we could tweak our game and some of our decision making and structures. So I think it is really important to always keep going back to either another sport, basketball, football, AFL. There's so much out there, as well as 15s coaches and players.
Let's switch gears now. Let's talk about the Olympics. With the 5th year now cycle coming into play with Tokyo next year, how has your team's outlook changed, especially after finishing off a successful last tournament in Vancouver?
Yeah, well, we made 4 of the 6 finals this year, and really felt where our game, we always knew it would take time to get that consistency, and we knew that really as soon as we started. You've had the conversations around what we all had to do, but so we knew we couldn't win consistently, so we didn't try to, because we didn't think we could. So we picked certain tournaments and certain times of the year, that first year with the Com Games and World Cup, to really target that. Last year we felt it was a really good opportunity for us to obviously try and qualify for the Olympics, but to try and really grow our capabilities on the field and physically. And you made a few mistakes last year, especially in the middle part of the year around that consistency. We started well, and then we faded a wee touch through that middle part, although we lost 2 games in Las Vegas and Vancouver to the last play of the game that could have changed our season around. But I think it would have probably papered over a couple of things. So we done a lot of work in the off season to try and get that consistency. So when the Olympics have been cancelled, I guess, as I said right at the start, that disappointment that we felt we were in a really good spot. We came home from Vancouver with a new team that went. We took 2 new staff. We felt we'd really built depth across the program, early in Vancouver to launch into Hong Kong, where periodised our year to try and peak in Hong Kong and practice peaking and see how that went. But I guess the outlook, is how good can we be in another year? Because we've got some young players that I think early in Vancouver showed. If you look at Narohi Magabi-Black or Tony Enshu's now becoming, a genuine world-class sevens player. We've got William Warbrick. We've got 2 or 3 young boys that haven't played this year that we've just recruited. I'm genuinely excited around how that sort of middle tier or younger tier, how much better they can be to add real depth to our squad. I think the challenge for our older players and, our senior players is to bring that next group up. I'm busy watching, as probably you fellas are watching, the Michael Jordan Last Dance this week, and they were talking about the elevator, when you're really at the top. So we've got Timmy and Scott and KB, Sione, they're 4 leaders. They're probably right at the very top of their game. So they're not going to, the rugby's not going to improve that much now. Physically, they're not going to improve out of sight. They can always chip away a little bit. But their job now is to get Regan and Dallen and Joe Webber and Narohi and that middle tier of boys up to the same level as them. Because if they can do that, then our whole team's stronger again. Then their job, I guess, is to bring on Will Warbrick and Amanaki Nicole and Narohi, as I say, a couple of those younger players that haven't played yet. Our job is to get them as far up as possible. Outlook's not changed, as in we need to take a breath, I guess, and get through this COVID-19 virus, and and hopefully the world can settle down. We can get back on the field. But I think once we get through this sort of tough period and the sort of survival mode fades to looking forward, I'm really excited around where we can get the group to. I think there's some certain areas we've still got a lot of growth in our game and within individuals and within our culture and our leadership and performance week, and there's huge opportunity for us to be better. So, and I genuinely think some of these younger players are going to be really exciting how far we can push them up in the next year and put some real pressure. If we can get the Super Rugby players back again, Metani Nanai and Saturu and Caleb Clark and Celeste, if we can keep them involved, we've got a bit of work to do with that, because that was, it was a 1-year deal for the Olympics for those boys. Hopefully we can keep them involved. They certainly all want to be involved, so we just need to do the work on that. And then our group of 24, 25 players again, should be stronger next year.
You obviously have a good pathway, and some of the countries have development sides. Do you field development sides that go to Oceania tournaments, or is it just more of they're in your system centralized and then they come up through the ranks?
Yeah, we've been a little bit different. So we've had a development team play. Yep. So the short answer is, yeah, we have had a development team play. This year we had 5 players. So we sort of went wide 3 years ago to a team last year to 5 individuals this year. So, we tried to funnel towards Olympics because we knew we'd have more full-time contracts this year. So we felt if we had 24, 25 full-time, we had 5 or 6 in behind that'd be a big enough group of players to deal with injuries and deal with 10 tournaments leading into July. So I guess our challenge now is probably to go back out a little bit for the next little while. There's a great opportunity for us within New Zealand, because New Zealand schools, New Zealand 20s, the under-19s tournament, the Jock Hobbs under-19s tournament had to be postponed for a year because of COVID-19. So all the best young talent that we don't really get access to usually could free up, because they're going to be looking for opportunities to play rugby through this next 6 months. So, we certainly don't want those teams not playing around New Zealand 20s and under-19s tournament and so on. But it might create an opportunity for us to really get an opportunity to get in there and get some of these, because there will be some internal sevens, later in the year. We're already planning some of that. So that could be an exciting opportunity for us to get some of the best young talent playing sevens and coming to a development program, whatever that looks like in 2021. I have noticed a real shift in New Zealand over the last 3 years around the young males. The girls are desperate to play for the sevens team because they've got such a huge profile and been so successful, and they're fully professional. It's one of the few women's sports in the country that's fully professional. But I have noticed a difference, say last year to the 2 years previous, around the best young players in the country playing sevens, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Your 15 players coming through. Between World Cup and Olympic cycles, I suppose you do get some of you guys coming through. What are your thoughts, though, bringing in a 15-a-side professional player, a high-level name, like Sonny Bill Williams did in the last Olympic cycle? What are your thoughts about bringing those players in before you have some sort of major event coming up?
Yeah, well, we went through a big process last year. So one of the big things we learned around 16 was the culture and the cohesiveness of the team. And without talking too much around what happened in 16, because I wasn't there were certainly some lessons around how we integrate and who we integrate when. So we done a lot of work in that first 18 months, even though we were playing and going to the Com Games and World Cup and so on. We spent a lot of time off the field with the high performance manager, Tony Philp, and myself, really looking at the strategy of what players we would bring in to try and win the Olympics. And the short version of that is we identified, I think it was 45 players within New Zealand rugby that weren't playing sevens, that we gave the opportunity to come to a meeting. So we went to all the Super Rugby teams through the front door, met with the coaches, high performance managers, here's the 5 players or 6 players or 10 players in your franchise we would be interested in if they've got an interest in playing sevens. Now, out of that, I guess there was some real mixed response from the 15s players, as in there wasn't actually that many of them wanting to play. Now, you'd have to ask them, why that is, but I get an established All Black or an established Super Rugby player not necessarily wanting to play sevens because, one, it's bloody hard, and it's harder than just playing one game a week. And I think everybody knows that. 2, if they want to be an All Black, they need to be playing Super Rugby in their heads for that year. So transitioning from a World Cup, there was a lot of the middle tier, like George Bridge or Will Jordan or, Kira Ioane or, there's a lot of players in there that were, I guess, going to be jostling for an All Black spot this year. So that obviously influences their thinking because they think that to be an All Black, that's where they need to play. So our thinking right from the start was we wanted to get some of the best young talent. So when the pinnacle events do roll around, we're bringing players back as opposed to dropping players in. And that's what we've done this year. And I think the results are obviously really positive, but the way we're training and the excitement and the cohesiveness and the culture behind the scenes has been such good fun this year with these boys coming back. We've really enjoyed Etienne and Celesi and Caleb and Scott Gregory was going to join us when we got back from Vancouver. And it really felt right. It felt we weren't just dropping in a Sonny Bill Williams over the top of a player that had been here for 3 or 4 years, knocking his pan in every day. Because ultimately, you boys know and I know, we could play our very best and lose. We could have David McKenzie, Bodie Barrett, Adi Savia in the team and still lose. The New Zealand had a very strong team in 2016. South Africa has strong teams and lost big tournaments. Fiji had a rock star team at the World Cup in 18 and didn't win. So there's enough evidence to show that I think and we think that the team is what can win us the pinnacle events and us having a real clear understanding how we operate on and off the field. So that's really our philosophy is we want to identify young players to come into the programme, to go off into 15s and become full-time professionals and All Blacks. And that's a part of this team's job. But then in the pinnacle events, either Commonwealth Games or World Cups or Olympics, we then have the opportunity to bring them back as opposed to just dropping them in. So, and everybody's different. All teams, countries might look at it slightly different. Australia's dabbled with a few this year. Fiji, as I say, obviously in 2018, dabbled with quite a few, came back for 2 tournaments plus the World Cup. South Africa, I've got some quality sevens players that are in 15s and Sinatla and Speckman and those boys that were obviously playing a bit this year and then we're going to come back for the back end. So I think everybody does it slightly different. You just got to work out what you think suits your team.
Yeah, going back to what you said earlier about, your culture and family and, it doesn't happen overnight. And anytime you take one person out and put one in and they don't know the language, they don't know the guys, I always look at it as anytime I welcome a new player in, it's the same way because, they're going through a bunch of stuff and then there's all that pressure as well. And so knowing your systems but the biggest thing is just looking at them as humans, right? And how they interact and if they've never interacted together before, it's going to be a shock to the system. But then of course, those guys that have been there for a long time, if you just bring a rock star in, it's just going to crush everything you've just built for 4 years too. So I love your approach on that.
As I say, it's such fine lines. We can lose. We could have the best player. We could play our best rugby and lose. So we've got to get up the next day and look each other in the eyes and then move on. It'd be a pretty tough place to move on if we brought in a heap of players who are only there for 4, 5, 6 weeks. We lose, and then we've got to go back to the other players and then ask them to, get ready for a pre-season, to get ready for a Commonwealth Games and World Cup the year after. So I just think it's really important. There's a balance to that. If a rock star player or a Damien McKenzie rings me up tonight and says he wants to come in from the start of the season, and do your pre-season and, come to all the tournaments, and that's a different conversation. So I think that's the key is how long you can have them for and who they are if they've been with you before makes a massive difference.
It's been said multi-sport games are a distraction, and you and I both know from the Com Games that there was just mayhem on and off the field. What is your approach with dealing with these multi-sport events, and how are you helping your side prepare in the build-up to the 2021 Olympics?
To really embrace it and love it. You're right. There's a lot of distractions, but I see them as opportunities to be inspired by other sports, other athletes. Even going to your Olympic meeting as a group. We had one not that long ago here, where you're doing all your outfitting, and there's meetings and so on around what the New Zealand Olympic team looks like. So So I really think if you try and fight against it and see it as an issue, yeah, you'll come unstuck, because it will become an issue, because you can't, if you see these Olympic athletes in a village, our players probably do want selfies with them and get their autograph. I don't know, you're sure if autographs still exist, but, get a selfie or have a coffee with, these athletes. I think those experiences are awesome, and we really try and embrace it. The Commonwealth Games were a real structure to how we managed that, and we went into the village early to make sure we had the opportunity to do that, to embrace it and find our feet and find where you eat and how much you eat and where's the good coffee versus the bad coffee. So the distractions are mitigated. Then we went back out and cleared our heads a little bit, and then came back in the village for our tournament week. So we were looking to replicate something similar with the Olympics. But you got to go there. You want to go there and see New Zealand win a gold medal. You want to see other athletes do well. New Zealand has some great traditions around being welcomed in with a haka, and you welcome other athletes in if they win medals and so on. So I love that part of it. I think it's one of the reasons I love being involved with Sevens, is because you don't get that in 15. Even the hotels in the World Series, 16 teams, yarning to other coaches, having a beer, having a coffee. When would you get that in 15s? And I think Sevens players are better set up for that, and I think it's for life in general. It's I think it's somebody like an Andy Friend. I get text of Friendy almost every tournament. Been watching and what's been happening and asking about players and texting him around these they're going good. So
we had Andy on a couple of days ago actually, and we were taking the piss out of him because he bought a tent. Him and his wife, they're going to head into the country camping, but obviously they couldn't, so he was camping and having a fire roast. I called it the Galway Outback. So yeah, we had a good catch up with him a couple of days ago.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's as I say, when he finished, that was an example of 15s coach. He's a 15s coach at Coach Sevens, and he was doing an amazing job with Australia. I thought he had them going real. They were really unfortunate at the Com Games. I don't know if anybody will remember, but they were playing England, and one of their players kicked the ball. I think it was the last play of the game, or almost kicked the ball away, and England got the ball and went the length and scored. And we played England in the semi-final. I'm not sure I would have fancied playing Australia, in the Gold Coast in a semi-final of the Commonwealth Games. We certainly had them going good at that time. So,
how's your coaching philosophy changed over your coaching career?
I guess I've matured as a man. So that's changed, how I deal with people and how I try and get the best out of people. I guess as your roles change, it sort of changes what you do. So if you're a younger coach, it's just a skills coach. Certainly at Taranaki in the Hurricanes, my first year, I never even travelled with the team at the Hurricanes the first year. My whole sole focus was the technical part of the game. So my philosophies, what I looked for in the game, how I tried to coach, drills, was heavily influenced by what my role was. And I guess as you move through to an assistant and a head coach, you sort of, where you're focusing, what you're looking at within the game, or who you're dealing with. Say my first year with the Hurricanes, when I was it was heavily involved with the younger players or the players that didn't play. By the time you're third year and you're helping run the attack and working with the backs, you're heavily involved with the strategy and the leaders within the team. And then once you're the head coach, I guess you're heavily involved with the staff, assistant coaches. Luckily in Sevens, you still get to coach a full area of the game. So my philosophy is around trying to grow people. I think I've really sort of moved towards that. Trying to inspire and grow people, whether that's a player or a staff member. When you're a younger coach, you're not really worried about other staff. You're just doing your job. So I think the maturity part and being a bit more comfortable in my own skin, I guess, my own identity, my own reflections over this last 6 weeks has really helped that. It really get me clear on, I guess, what my own why is and why I love coaching and why I'm involved coaching. I've had some good time to really reflect on that. So I'm not sure if my philosophies to the game have changed that much. I love attacking. I love optimism. I love an aggressive defensive team. I genuinely want to play the complete game if we can, and be excited by the game plan. I love working with players and allowing them freedom to build the game and have input, into the game, and not try and give too many of my ideas all the time. I guess when you're younger, you feel like you want to show everybody what you know and how many ideas you've got and what drill or game you've got. I guess as I mature, you start realising it's unlocking what they know and what their ideas are. And we've all got smart rugby players, especially here. We've got some amazing, thinkers on Sevens. So I sometimes feel that's my job, is just to unlock that. It's not necessarily even what I know or don't know. certainly there's some good challenges. You know, we've got some good players that really challenge you on that. Guys like a Joe Webber and stuff have really helped tweak our defence and change our defence this year, and I was a bit reluctant to that in the off-season. If that had been 3 or 4 years ago, I'd have probably stuck to what I thought we wanted to do. But as I've matured a wee touch and, you know, got a few more grey hairs, I realised that his idea doesn't really matter whose idea it is, because if it's his idea, he's going to make it work. And if it's a player's idea, they're going to have to make it work because they're going to be accountable to it. So I guess that's how I've changed. You know, if I think back to Taranaki, it was my first adult coaching to now, if that's a 10, 12 years or 11 years, I'd probably use the maturing. Not always. I can still go backwards a wee touch now and again.
Oh, that's fantastic insight, because player-centric coaching, you need to be that mature coach, as you said, because it doesn't matter about whose idea is it in the end. That's absolutely spot on. I know a lot of coaches have been listening to this podcast, and that's really valuable insight for them.
There's a lot of smart podcasts coming out of the UK at the minute around coaching, and I was listening to a guy head of creation and innovation or something with Google, and he talked about you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, you just have to unlock the smartest thinking. You know, and that's so true, isn't it? When you've got some players, as I say, you look at like a Joe Webber or, you know, Kurt Baker or Scott Curry, like Skaz is a great thinker, Timmy Mickelson are great thinkers on the game and what opportunities are within the game, you know, so we'd be stupid not to listen to them.
You surround yourself with good people. You just got to drink more coffee and enjoy the success. That's one thing I've learned. So I know one big influence on your program and on you is the legendary Tomasi Kama Jr. You share some of his demeanors, his influence on both the program and yourself.
Well, it's huge. It's not to be underestimated by any means. You know, as usual, the head coaches get to speak about their team and, you know, get interviewed if you win, or I guess get interviewed if you lose too. But he's a great man. So when I worked with the team originally in 2011 and 12, we had a really good relationship off the field and on the field as a coach player. You know, and I loved working with him and got my eyes open to why New Zealand was so successful, the subtleties within the game. You know, I was like, man, no wonder he used to beat us every time. So that, you know, and we really kept in touch. Tomasi, as he transitioned from a player to a coach, he's a great learner. He's really curious and optimistic. He wants to find out why do you do this or why do you do that. So he would come down to Wellington. We'd have a couple of hours just talking about coaching, and, you know, he'd write stuff down. He would record it. He's a really deep thinker. You know, he doesn't necessarily always speak that much in big groups or big meetings, or, you know, especially the Zoom calls. He sometimes worries if his screen's frozen. But you speak to him on his own a couple of days later, and he's like, "Oh, I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about that. I think we should do that." So he's got a great ability to think about not only on the field now. He's really starting to think about the bigger picture. You know, and initially, I guess he's like me. You know, 2-3 years ago, he's just thinking about attack. How do we unlock our defence? And I guess joining up the dots, how everything leads to that attack. It's not just about the attack. And I think he's arguably the best player that's played the game. You know, people argue against that, and, you know, that's right. There's Sarevi and William Ryder, and, you know, there's been some amazing players that's played for Fiji and New Zealand. But I always felt he had the complete game. He was aggressive. He was a good defender. He was fit. He could kick. He was obviously an amazing playmaker and ability to beat people with footwork or goose steps. He wasn't lightning quick, but he was always quick enough, you know, and he was an amazing rugby player. As Sevens transitioned through that period of being a little bit loose and free, you know, when Sarevi played, and I guess even when I played, and that the defences were really, the breakdown was nothing like what it is now. So footwork and ability to goose and dummy was probably enough in those days. But Tomasi, I thought, you know, was sort of the complete player. And as he's maturing as a coach, he's got the ability to become, you know, the complete Sevens coach too, because he gets the game, he gets culture. Obviously, his upbringing in Fiji, and, you know, he's got huge humility and just a good man. You know, he's great to work with. You know, we have great fun just sitting yarning. Never used to drink coffee until, you know, the last couple of years, so we've got him into coffee, so it's good. And he gets us into Kava every now and again. So he's been involved with the team over 100 tournaments. And Hamilton this year was 100 tournaments as a player and a coach. So we got him a Kava bowl with his Sevens number on it and presented that to him and his family. And we got a little photograph. He's down in Taranaki, he's in Hawara, South Taranaki on the west coast. So we got a photograph through the other day. The Kava bowl was filled up, so it was looking good.
Yeah, I've been around for so long. I remember when I was playing for the US for at least 3 years, he used to carve us up every time. And I was trying to mark him all the time. And you mentioned Sir Ravi and Ryder. Those obviously were exceptional players, but he just brought a different dimension. And it's really cool to see him with his beards growing strong too, on the series.
Yeah, he's, and that was one of the pleasing things about Vancouver. We went without Tomasi, so it was the first time we went to a tournament early in Vancouver without Tomasi with us. So it definitely felt strange, for especially for me. I'm sure the players felt the same, but it allowed him to spend some time at home with his girls, and he's got a young family and stuff too. So, but he was especially through 2009 to maybe 2013. He was the best player in the world every year. I thought, he didn't win the World Player of the Year every year, but man, he was some rugby player.
Can't replace that kind of experience, but just that calming presence. And as a coach, there's so many working pieces. So I have a Fijian best friend that I played with all over in a bunch of tournaments after I finished playing for Canada, and he comes up he was the genius inside my head, and he'd come whisper to me, "Tell the boys this." And I'd say after a while, I'd say, "Penny, you tell the boys this." "No, I don't talk. You talk." And so I would tell the boys, and then the boys, I'm like, "How do you know us?" I'm like, "I don't know anything. It's all from Penny."
Yeah, I'm a little bit similar. Tomasi sees stuff that nobody else sees. His ability to number count the game and see where opportunities are. You can see why he was such a good player.
Class. What are some of your personal goals going forward, and what are you doing to focus on your personal development?
Personal development, it's been a really good time for that, hasn't it? A time for self-reflection, a time for team reflection. We've done some work as a group of management around our key focuses for the year, and had a really good review on why we think some areas have went really well, and some areas we think we can really keep growing behind the scenes. My own personal development, I think, as I touched on there, that the self-reflection around where I'm at as a man rather than a rugby coach has been really good, around where I'm with my family and my girls and what we're trying to do as a family. I think it's been really good for me and my wife Karen to spend that time together and just talk about our family and how we're parenting. My oldest daughter's 12, so she's got her teenage years coming up, so I'm in for a rough ride for the next few years. So that's been really good, just to take time out and think. As I say, I've been doing a bit of reading and podcasting and webinaring and just listening to people talk. I'm really interested in the environment and creating the right type of environment to allow our players and staff to grow and to really express themselves. So, I've been getting a little bit deeper on that side of it for me as a coach. So I'm quite excited to get back. Got notebooks full of notes. I guess the key now will be to find 2 or 3 real critical things we think we can implement into our team. And, that's the exciting part for me. And I guess that's also my goal. My goal is to genuinely keep growing as a coach. I still think I'm a young coach, but when I start looking at stuff or reflecting, I sometimes get a little bit nervous that I've got so much stuff I need to try and be better at. I think there's no time to do it. I'm going to be dead before I get a chance to be good at all this stuff. So I need to crack on and speed up a wee bit on my learning and practice it. And so I'm just excited. The goals will be the same when it comes to on-field. We want to go to the Olympics and play well. And we want to create a team that can obviously try and win a medal and ultimately win a gold medal. We know that's why we're here, but we need to be really careful it doesn't define us. I think this last 6 weeks around the world, it's probably recalibrated all of us to make sure we don't take ourselves too seriously. And we do just play a sport that we love, and we were so fortunate to be involved in a job that we do love. I just hope we can all survive. All the teams and the coaches and players can get through this, because I genuinely think there's some tough times coming around the world trying to come out the other side of this. So our goal will be, as a team, will be to connect with our communities, try and inspire New Zealand by what we do in our community first, and then our on field and our rugby can, whenever we get a chance to do that again, we can try and take that to another level to really make New Zealand proud and make our families proud, but make the country proud around how we conduct ourselves and how we play.
Speaking about that pride, my last question for you is your favourite moment so far as the New Zealand Sevens coach?
Oh, way too many for one. The obvious would be the World Cup and the Commonwealth Games. To play in a Commonwealth Games, especially early, it was reasonably early. We were quite nervous around had we done the right prep by not going to Hong Kong, and we'd obviously only won one tournament, which was Cape Town that season. That was huge for our confidence, and both the men's and women's teams winning together was an awesome feeling. And to play Fiji in the final, in a real tight game, 14-0, I think it was cool. And then the World Cup, I thought was if I've been brutally honest, sceptical around around the stadium. When we got there and we watched baseball, I think it was 6 days or before, I'm like, man, how is this going to be a rugby stadium? And then, are we going to get a crowd? The new format with the straight knockout, I was probably a little bit critical around that. But once the tournament kicked off and it was another tournament, it was a great atmosphere. And it's similar to Titch around the Fijian supporters. I'm not sure they get enough credit around the world of what they give to Sevens. When we played them in that semi-final and there was 45 or 50,000, I'm not sure how many were Fijians, but it felt like more than half. It was a great atmosphere. And to play them with the team they had, the way they played their first couple of games, that game went down, as a real sort of memory of getting it right. Tomasi, we scored 3 set-piece tries. You talk about Tomasi's influence, that was all in him. That was the whole year, looking at analysis and opportunities we thought we could really use when we needed them in big games. And then there's other tournaments, the first tournament we won in Cape Town, the second tournament involved. Looking back, I'm not even sure how we won that. We had nothing in our game when it came to systems and structure. We just had a massive enthusiasm to try and play well. And to win that tournament, made a final the weekend before, gave us massive confidence. Dubai last season, when we went down to 9 players, coming out of the semi-final, we only had 9 players left for the final. When we were under the pump, Vilimoni Koroi arrived in the morning of day 1. So within that 9, he was one of those 9s. He'd arrived. We met him at the stadium because we've got injuries in warm-ups, injuries in training. That was a special win. And probably the 2 from this year would be Cape Town, playing South Africa on a 50,000 and 7-5 in a really tight contest. It felt like an international. I've never played test match rugby or coached it. I've been to plenty, but that's what it felt like. It was a huge atmosphere. And our boys, the smiles on their faces when the anthems finished. I knew we were going to play well. We'd looked at the game from the week before, losing in the final, and were frustrated the way we played. That was a great experience. And winning in Hamilton with our friends and our families. And it wasn't really about the winning. It was actually in the changing room straight after the whistle. I don't know if it felt flat, but it felt more like relief, because we went and won it at home for 4 years. But by the time we got inside and all the team was together and the players that hadn't played were there, they'd been there for the day, our wives and kids and so on. That was really special. And within all those wins, it's actually after. It's in the, it's in the bus on the way home. It's in the changing room having a beer. They're the stuff that you'll remember. They're the real highlights. Because you lose more often than you win, obviously. So it's the actual tournaments. So yeah, it's really celebrating those moments and making memories as a group. Off the field and behind the scenes is probably the part I enjoy the most.
And Clark, I will say one quick thing. Talking about that 50,000 seater in Cape Town, the Cape Town Stadium, I've never seen a crowd go so quiet at the end of a game. Because, of course, South Africa had a lot of possession and, had so many dangerous steppers and were looking to create havoc and that sort of stuff. But you guys completely shut them out. And just walking out of that stadium, it was obviously, you want the home side to win if you're just a regular fan, right? Because everybody's there supporting the home team. But it was an epic win for New Zealand. And you guys actually have a lot of support in South Africa as well.
Yeah, we traditionally, we've always played there, played well in South Africa. And obviously way back to the apartheid and stuff that and the blacks in South Africa. I really respect New Zealand for the way they've conducted themselves, on the field, and with that diversity within our country, how it's been embraced. I suppose they've always sort of looked up to that on the field, haven't they? So it felt like a pinnacle event. The changing room after it. It was Sam Dixon's 50th. The boys, the wheels came off a wee touch after it in the changing room. It felt like a pinnacle event. So it was really cool fun.
Congrats, Coach.
All right, my final question for you is around one of my favorite topics. So coffee talk. Clark and I grabbed a coffee the Friday before the Vancouver Sevens, and I was trying to tee up to pick his brain. And thankfully, the junior Canada girls that I was coaching went undefeated day 1, so they gave me the morning off, which is quite rare in a Sevens competition. But I ordered a coffee for him because I was there early, and he was a triple shot of espresso and hot water. So can you walk me through how you became a triple shot of espresso guy with a side of hot water?
Lack of sleep. It's actually, I didn't drink any. Well, you boys have been in New Zealand. Have you both been in New Zealand? Have you?
Yeah.
The coffee culture here it's almost unbelievable. But I'm heavily part of it now and entrenched in the coffee culture. But when I first arrived in New Zealand, I didn't drink coffee. I would have the odd Starbucks or something like that. But the guy, Mike Collins, who I touched on before, who was the academy manager and my boss, every time we wanted to discuss something or we had an idea or we wanted to throw stuff around, you're like, oh, let's go for a coffee. So I would go for a coffee and I would just order anything. So flat white, latte, cappuccino, long black, just anything. And he is a staunch Steinlager Classic man, and he drinks long blacks, which is basically a double shot with a little bit of hot water. So he just drank that, and he got so sick of me changing it up, he decided that I would now drink long blacks. So it seemed way easier than trying to wrestle him. He's a former prop, played for the Chiefs and stuff, and he was my boss. So usually he was paying. So as a true tight Scotsman, I decided that it was a way easier option just to stick to a double shot, which is a New Zealand. You don't really get long blacks. That, you know, it's not called a long black over the world. It's Australia and New Zealand have a long black, which is a double shot. It's a short tulip cup with a double shot. And most places you go to around the world, the coffee's not quite as strong as New Zealand. So hence the fact that place was called Coffee, wasn't it, in Vancouver?
Yeah.
We found that on the first day. So when the hotel had been moved, we were panicking because you can go 2 or 3 days in a new city and not find a good coffee. And we luckily found that the very first day down in that new part of Vancouver, we stumbled across it. But we worked out after 2 or 3 coffees that it wasn't quite as strong as what I was used to. So hence the fact we ended up with a triple shot with a little side of hot water.
Yeah, when I was a young player, I was just crazy on the field like a water bug. And when the older guys found out that because I got an Italian side, my mother's Italian, and I played a season in Italy. So I would drink a full pot of espresso before games, and they're like, didn't do any, barely drank, didn't do any alcohol, didn't eat any candy, but I was just Italian firewater all the way. So I knew when you ordered that, you were a good man. So on behalf of Dallen and I and the Rugby Hive, we're honored to have you on, and I know our listeners out there will be thrilled to hear your wise words.
Sensational. Shut the gates, keep the change, try time.
Too easy, yeah?
Thank you so much, Bad. Really just brilliant. I mean, obviously been following you a lot in the last few years, and just such an honor to chat to you and get your insight. Really special moments.
Hopefully when the world gets back a little bit normal, we can get a triple shot in a game of seven.
You betcha. Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Cheers, fellas. Thank you.
I know.
Beautiful ball over the top. Yes, Seppo!
Thank you for listening, you sleek sensations.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to Rugby Hive Podcast and catch us on all the socials at Rugby Hive.
We appreciate your support. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
I've taken a lunch money from South